Without any further ado, Dr. Cypess.
If that wasn't a collegial introduction, then I don't know one. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, thank you to Josh and Mark for the kind invitation to speak with you this evening. Thank you to the entire Jewish Community Forum of Raritan Valley Organizing Committee, especially thanks to the community Rabbanim who are here. It's a great honor, particularly to Rabbi Meir Downick, Rabbi Wittenberg, and to Congregation Abbas Achim for allowing us to use the space this evening. It's really a special opportunity for me to be able to share what I'm calling a first draft of these ideas in my hometown, in a community that's been incredibly supportive of me, particularly in the last year that I was at Rutgers. It was a difficult year, and I really felt a lot of love and support from this community. So very grateful to you again for allowing me to share these ideas in this context. It will be no surprise to many of you when I say that higher education is in a state of crisis. Sensationalist headlines in the media, coupled with congressional hearings featuring a parade of college presidents, have highlighted these institutions' inability or unwillingness to foster critical, well-informed, and well-reasoned debate. Instead, in the name of academic freedom, many universities have become sanctuaries for anti-Israel propaganda, which I understand to be inherently anti-Semitic. This propaganda is rooted in the cynical idea that, quote, knowledge is power. That is, that knowledge must be wielded as a form of power. This notion has given many college and university professors the license, or so they think, to distort facts or to suit their own narratives. One example was just exposed last week in an essay in the Times of Israel. The medical journal Lancet, which has a history of publishing distorted anti-Israel material, published yet another article about the public health crisis in Gaza, surely a topic worthy of serious discussion. But the article took as fact the clearly inflated, distorted numbers of civilian casualties put forth by Hamas terrorists. When medical journals, right, and articles authored by medical academics are infected by such propagandistic approaches, we should all be up in arms. The doctrine promoted by the late Associate Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis would have university leaders counter such propaganda by calling it what it is, pointing out factual inaccuracies and cultivating reasoned, intellectually honest discussion. With few exceptions, university leaders have failed to do so. Thus, they have not only failed Israel and Jews, but they have failed in their fundamental mission as educators. But the assault on higher education in the United States is not only coming from far-left anti-Zionist activists. Since the financial downturn of 2008, the population of the US has become increasingly skeptical of the very idea of education for its own sake. Understandably worried about the financial outcomes of a college education, many parents have pushed their children to find the fastest, cheapest option, often the most superficial, to earn a college degree, sometimes forcing young people into majors or professions that seem lucrative at the expense of their children's full growth and development. A portion of the Orthodox community in the US has embraced this trend, as many families direct their children to the quickest path to graduation. As understandable as this tendency is, I would like to raise my hand and ask if we could talk about it. I think we need to recognize the risks that this trend entails for our children and for our community as a whole. And indeed, I would say to society at large, and maybe we'll get there. Have we taught our children to prioritize money above all else? Have we forced our children away from altruistic careers and into professions that may not actively help the world? Have we denied our children the opportunity to think slowly and carefully, to challenge themselves and be challenged, to learn about their peers and about worlds that they have not yet encountered? It's not my intention here to denigrate professional or vocational education, as long as we are leaving the option of such education at that level as an option, not as an imperative or a mandate. as we also allow our children to think about what it might look like to live a life informed by curiosity, open-ended inquiry, and responsibility to the world at large. It would be a pity indeed if we were to pour our energy and our communal resources into an expensive Yeshiva day school education and expensive gap year programs in Israel, only to abandon our children's education when they reach the age of college, just when their minds are ready to develop into responsible adulthood. To give you a little bit of background about where I'm coming from, I completed my PhD in 2008, that very year of that downturn. And I got my first full-time job as a professor at that point. In 2012, I moved to Rutgers, where I worked my way up to tenured full professor and became involved also in academic administration, first as an associate chair and then as an associate dean. You heard a little bit about my experience with JFAS, which I founded together with Ahavas Achim member Jenny Mandelbaum. And Jenny and I served as volunteer co-chairs of JFAS for 8 years. After October 7th, 2023, it became clear to me fairly quickly that I could not remain in my position as an associate dean at Rutgers, since I couldn't in good conscience continue to serve as an ambassador for that institution. I told my dean that I would serve out the rest of my term, which was due anyway to end in June 2024, and then I would step down and return to the faculty, or so I thought. And I was trying to figure out how to regroup from there, how I might be able to tackle some of the distorted, activist, dishonest intellectual activity that was happening in universities, particularly in the humanities, but not only in the humanities. And then in December 2023, Josh Kaplan forwarded me the announcement that YU was looking for a new dean. So he also deserves some of the credit, Rabbi. A new dean of the Undergraduate Faculty of Arts and Sciences, that is of Stern and Yeshiva College. And I moved to that, I was offered that position just before Pesach in 2024. The New York Post claimed that I was leaving Rutgers because of anti-Semitism, and that actually is not true. I left because I saw an opportunity in my new position at YU to promote a vision of higher education that embraces Orthodox Judaism fully, its history, its heritage, its commitment to being Mekadesh Shem Shamayim in the world. And moreover, that this vision of higher education can, God willing, serve as a model for a renewal of the basic principles of intellectual honesty and open-ended inquiry that should be the driving forces of academic institutions nationwide. So in our time together this evening, or what's left of it, I'd like to offer a blueprint for this renewal by suggesting simply an orientation, a mindset, a worldview, a way of thinking about college-level education within the Orthodox community today. The two colleges that I have the honor to serve, Stern and Yeshiva College, constitute the proving ground for this mindset. Yet instilling this mindset in our young people is not something that can be achieved by a dean or by the faculty, and I'll mention Dr. Shana Trapito, one of our outstanding faculty members who's here this evening, or even in the brief period that we have students on campus alone. The achievement of this mindset must be a community-wide endeavor, one that involves community rabbanim, parents and grandparents, high schools in the United States, seminaries and yeshivas in Israel, community members and supporters and cheerleaders, and yes, donors. Yeshiva University has long been an anchor of Orthodox Judaism, and I know this because everybody has an opinion about how I should be doing my job, which, by the way, I welcome because it means that everybody feels a stake in the institution. It's a university, but it's much more than that. It contains aspects of community institutions like shuls and yeshivas and community centers that are far more wide-reaching. That's because YU has shaped every aspect of our community in the United States and even to a significant extent in Israel. YU is the umbrella institution that has trained generations of our rabbis through the Smicha program at REITs, educators through the Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education, scholars through the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies, therapists and social workers through the Fairkauf Graduate School of Psychology and the Wurzweiler School of Social Work, legal minds through the outstanding Cardozo Law School, health professionals through the Katz School of Science and Health, business leaders through the Cy Sims School of Business. In other words, Yeshiva University is everywhere within our community. It's within the two colleges that I now serve as dean, Stern and Yeshiva College, that the grand experiment of juxtaposing and synthesizing rigorous traditional Torah learning and the expansive study of the sciences, social and behavioral sciences, arts and humanities must become a reality. If not at YU, then where? The intellectual, spiritual, and communal heritage of Yeshiva University resonates across our community, whether or not a YU diploma hangs on each of our walls. The orientation, the mindset that I'd like to promote within these two colleges and across our broader community might start from a passage from the Gemara in Sukkah 28a about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, a star student of Hillel, whom the Gemara nevertheless calls the least of his generation. His educational program is awe-inspiring. Amru alav al Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, shelo hiniach mikra u'mishna gemara halachot ve'agadot. They said about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai that he never ceased learning mikra, right, Tanakh, Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, and legend, Agada, Diktukei Torah, V'diktukei Sofrim, the finer points of Torah and of the scribes, Kalim v'chamorim u'gzerot shavot. He never stopped learning about Kal and Chomer, about Gezerah Shava, about the process of halachic exegesis, Tikufot u'gematriot, calendration and calculation, mathematics, Sichat malachei hasharet v'sichat shedim, the conversation of ministering angels and the conversation of demons. Sichat dekalim, the conversation of palm trees. Mishlot kofsin u'mishlot shualim, the parables of, or the sayings of launderers and the parables of foxes. Davar gadol v'davar katan, great things and small things. Reading this passage by itself is a mind-opening experience. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's greatest achievement, as we know, was the restoration of Judaism at the time of the destruction of the Second Beit HaMikdash. By begging of the Roman general Vespasian, Tein li Yavne v'chachameha, give me Yavne and its sages, he envisioned a path for Judaism that was centered around Torah learning rather than the avoda, the service, korbanot and everything that was enacted at the Beit HaMikdash. Yet here we learn that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was not fixated solely on textual interpretation alone. This passage shows us that he opened his doors and his mind to what was going on outside. The Gemara seems intentional in presenting the order of his subjects of study. He starts with and prioritizes Tanakh, Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, Agada. He masters that halachic process of Kal and Chomer and Gezerah Shava, and then he turns his eyes to the heavens, studying calendration, the Tikufot and the Gematriot, the waxing and waning of the moon, the ways of calculating the patterns of life. One might understandably think that he's only studying these things by way of practical application. How do we calculate Rosh Chodesh, for example? The same may be true if in more mysterious or mystical ways of his attempts to hear the conversation of angels and demons. I don't know what that means. But once we read that he is listening as well to the conversation of palm trees, I think we need to pause and question our assumptions. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is not attending to the world around him in a utilitarian way, in a way that enables simply the strict observance of law. Instead, he is open and curious about the world, looking at it, listening to it, and experiencing it with all his senses. I note that he's listening, as a musicologist, I note that he's listening to the palm trees, simply because it forms part of creation. Even more, by listening to the conversation of the laundrymen and women at the river, he sees and overhears how people live their lives. By listening to the parables of foxes, perhaps Aesop's fables, which Chazal knew, he opens himself to the lessons that can be learned from folk wisdom and literature of other nations. In sum, the Gemara concludes that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai never ceased learning Davar Gadol and Davar Katan, great things and small things. He understood when he was experiencing something momentous, even something as terrible as the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and he was ready. He knew and accepted the role that he had to play in changing the course of history. And perhaps his curiosity, his imagination, and his attention to detail allowed him to envision a way to transcend that terrible moment and see a different path for the Jewish people. No less significant, however, were the small things. He cared for the individual, the weak, the vulnerable. He recognized the details of Hashem's world, and he attended to each one. Is this Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's version of Torah Umada? Would he insist that so-called Greek wisdom is worthy of pursuit in its own right? The lofty words of Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb Zatzal certainly seem apt, as Lamb wrote in 1969, quote, "We must make it explicit and clear that we are committed to secular studies, including our willingness to embrace all the risks that this implies, not alone because of vocations or social reasons, but because we consider that it is the will of God that there be a world in which Torah be effective, that all wisdom issues ultimately from the wisdom of the Creator, and therefore it is the Almighty who legitimates all knowledge," and he italicizes all. But another reading, a softer reading, is offered by Dr. William Kohlbrenner, professor of English at Bar-Ilan University. Kohlbrenner reads Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's educational program as simultaneously less intense and more expansive. As Kohlbrenner writes, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, quote, not only studies Torah and science, constellations and calculations, but he's alive to the mysteries of nature, the whispers among the palm trees, as well as those beyond nature, the conversation of ministering angels. There are all sorts of conversations going on in the universe, and he wants to participate in them. We can even imagine him straining to overhear the launderers at their washing pools and paying attention to fox keepers as they work their trade. Kohlbrenner summarizes Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's position succinctly. Simply be present to what is around you. What might have led Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai to this educational program, which centers Torah, but also views science and seemingly secular wisdom as full components of his worldview? Sanhedrin 41a offers a clue. Kol shnotav shel Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, 120 shana. He lived for 120 years. 40 shana asak pragmatia. He did business, pragmatics, for 40 years. 40 shana lamad, 40 shana limed. Right? He learned for 40 years and he taught for 40 years. And Brachot 17a further explains his level of concern and investment in other people. Amru alav al Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, shelo hikdimu adam shalom me'olam ve'afilu nachri bashuk. They said about him that no one ever preceded him in issuing a greeting, not even to a Gentile in the marketplace. By engaging with those around him, whether in business, learning, or teaching, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai came to understand the value of hearing from others, learning from their experiences, their accumulated knowledge, and trusting that they too were worthy of time and attention. A similar openness, I would suggest, lies in the Gemara statements about the qualifications of a dayan of the Sanhedrin. Menachot 65a relates that judges must be yod'im shivim lashon, fluent in 70 languages. Shelo tehei Sanhedrin shoma'at mipi haturgaman, so that a Sanhedrin would never have to hear through the mouth of a translator. If this requirement seems outlandish, the Gemara notes that only a small handful of people ever achieved that level of linguistic virtuosity, and even the Rambam confirms that such expansive knowledge of languages cannot be taken as a literal requirement for all dayanim. Yet, even if interpreted flexibly, the mandate encodes deeper social structures that I think we need to account for. Learning languages implies speaking with other human beings, being curious about their lives, learning about their experiences, hearing from them directly. Learning languages is a long, arduous process that involves feeling vulnerable. How many of us, as we have studied another language, have stumbled over words, grammatical constructions, and needed to be corrected? I certainly have. In learning a language, each one of us becomes students of more fluent speakers, not just students of their language, but of their lives. What are the first questions that we're taught to ask when we learn a language? What's your name? Where are you from? What's your family like? What are your interests? Right? These are from textbooks. All textbooks in languages start with these basic questions. The requirement that the dayanim of the Sanhedrin must speak 70 languages or anything close to it suggests that they must experience the world and learn about other people firsthand. Even more, and I attribute this to my husband, Rabbi Josh Cypess, who pointed out to me that the mandate to learn 70 languages suggests that the Sanhedrin must be a tikkun, a correction, for the dispersal of the nations that occurred after Migdal Bavel. The dispersal set up barriers between nations by creating the inability to communicate. The judges of the Sanhedrin must learn 70 languages in order to break down those barriers and bring people back together. Just as Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai would eagerly greet everyone, including a Gentile in the market. All Dayanim are responsible for interacting with other people, showing curiosity for them and care about their lives, seeing how they live, how they're similar to or different from the Dayan himself. But why? What's the purpose of this broad knowledge of humanity? This is a question that the late Harav Dr. Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal addressed in his essay, The End of Learning. The title, borrowed from the great 17th century English writer John Milton, does not refer to the completion, the finishing of learning, but to its ultimate goal, its end. He argues that the study of the humanities, including the literature of other peoples and cultures, helps us to imagine experiences outside of our own, and indeed to assume responsibility for the world, as Rav Lichtenstein wrote. The humanities in sum enable us to expand our horizons with reference to man and society beyond the bounds of narrow personal experience that ordinarily circumscribe us. In doing so, they significantly enhance our ability to cope with the two primary challenges of the moral and spiritual self. Tikkun of the self within this antechamber of the world to come, and tikkun of the antechamber proper. Without denying that the humanities present risks and challenges, Rav Lichtenstein stresses that they afford us the ability to think beyond ourselves and assume responsibility for others. By tikkun of the self within this antechamber to the world to come, he meant, of course, the improvement of our own character, our own avodat Hashem in this world. By tikkun of the antechamber proper, he meant our attempts to improve the world at large by understanding and supporting others. That openness and curiosity about the world can lead to the assumption of responsibility is exemplified by no less a figure than Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the greatest example of everything. During his sojourn in Midian, Moshe worked for his father-in-law as a shepherd. Out in the fields one day, he saw a wonder. Vayomer Moshe, asura na be'ereh et hamareh hagadol hazeh, madua lo yiv'ar hasneh. Moshe said, I will turn now and see this great sight. Why is the bush not burning? According to the Midrash in Shmot Rabbah, the fact that Moshe turned aside to notice the burning bush, the fact that he turned aside alone, is what confirmed his suitability for leadership. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said he turned around and looked, as it stated, the Lord saw that Moshe turned to see. Once he looked at it, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, he is suitable to be the shepherd of Israel. So just noticing the wonder was enough. Moshe was attuned to that great wonder, a davar gadol in the words of the Gemara, that clearly exceeded the natural world. Why? Was there a utilitarian purpose to his curiosity? Apparently not, but it was in his questioning of the supernatural that he encountered God. It was his curiosity, his attentiveness, the fact that he paused and wondered that rendered Moshe suitable to be the shepherd of Israel. Yet Chazal are not content to let it rest with just Moshe's noticing of the davar gadol. They held too that he noticed the seemingly insignificant details of the world as well. And so the Midrash comments further, when Moshe, may he rest in peace, was herding in Yitro's flock in the wilderness, a kid fled from him. He pursued it until it reached cover, and once it reached cover, it happened upon a pool of water, and the kid stopped to drink. When Moshe reached it, he said, I didn't know you were running because of thirst. You're tired. And he carried it on his shoulder and went walking. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you have the compassion to behave with the flocks belonging to flesh and blood in this manner. By your life, chayecha, you will herd my flock, Israel. Yet even Moshe was not able to carry out all of Hashem's will on his own. When Hashem was instructing Moshe in the construction of the Mishkan, Moshe got stuck on the menorah. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, you shall make a menorah of pure gold. Moshe said to him, how will we make it? And Hashem said to him, out of hammered work, metal work, just go and make it. And Moshe had difficulty, for when he descended, he forgot how it was constructed. He went back up and said, "Master of the world, I have forgotten how to make the menorah." And Hashem said to him, "Look again and make it." And he took a pattern of fire and showed him the construction. He presented this image of fire of the menorah. But still Moshe had difficulty. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, "Go, Bezalel will make it." And Moshe went and talked to Bezalel, and Bezalel got it done. Why was Moshe unable to make the menorah? It's possible that he lacked the visual and technical perception that Bezalel had, but even more, Moshe was not trained. He didn't have that training in artisanship. Bezalel did. He was an artisan who came from a family of artisans that included his grandmother, Miriam, a musician. I would suggest, sorry to get that in there, I would suggest that Bezalel was educated to think visually, and he must already have learned the craft of metalwork. So when the moment came for him to fulfill God's mandate on earth by creating the menorah, along with all the other vessels and the Mishkan itself, he saw his opportunity. He was ready because of his education in the creative arts. He did not become an artisan because he knew he would one day create the menorah. He first trained as an artisan and then recognized the moment to act, and the menorah was the result. Even more than that, he understood all the talents of all the artists and artisans around him and organized them into a team. He was a leader who led the team to create all of the vessels and handiwork of the Mishkan. So to Moshe, his years as a shepherd trained him to pay attention to what was happening around him. He saw great things. He saw small things, as the Midrash relates. His training helped prepare him for his life's mission to shepherd the Jewish people, attending to their physical needs, their spiritual development, the supernatural miracles, and the small wonders that transpired to bring them to a state of redemption. So what lessons can we, the U.S. Orthodox community, derive from these traditions in our sources? And where do these sources leave Yeshiva University? At Stern College and Yeshiva University and Yeshiva College, we continue to insist that the pursuit of knowledge is intrinsically valuable, not as a means to an end, not as a weapon to be wielded against other people cynically, but as part of a project to be attentive, to be curious, to be compassionate, to understand Hashem's world and contribute to it in a spirit of goodwill and fellowship. At the same time, we acknowledge that education is a process, not a diploma, a mere piece of paper. We see it as a path to a successful life that includes a successful career, but is not reduced solely to a profession or a vocation. And incidentally, yes, I'd be happy to talk about career outcomes at another time, Q&A or later. Ethical ideas, deep knowledge, habits of good thinking, and curiosity about the world take time to build, and they are worthy of the time that they take. What would have happened if Moshe had refused his training as a shepherd, if Bezalel had gotten frustrated and thrown in the towel during his metalwork lessons? What if the Dayanim of the Sanhedrin had become tired of meeting new people and practicing their 70 languages? They would never even have heard Hashem calling to them, and thus would never have known what their missions were, let alone be ready and able to fulfill those missions when the opportunity arose. So let's return then to the Gemara in Sukkah with which we started. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai does not present us with mottos or insignias or bumper stickers. He never asks, is it permissible to listen to the sayings of launderers at the river or read Aesop's fables? As Kolbrenner explains, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai does these things because he is present to what is around him. Having been put on God's earth, he assumes that it's his job both to learn about the world and to use his knowledge to help others. He presents us with the simple idea of a Torah life as encompassing an abiding openness and curiosity. Without education, without that openness and curiosity, we cannot begin to understand our purpose in this world. And this is the openness, the presentness, and the curiosity that we're trying to cultivate at Yeshiva University, where we strive to realize the link between education and redemption. Thank you.